Cooper Park at 6th and D was the first park built in the city of Lincoln. Originally named Lincoln Park, it hosted some of the very first football games for both the University of Nebraska and Lincoln High School in the 1890s. About 2 miles away from Cooper Park is an area by Antelope Creek that was another location for early football games. The M Street Park was the ideal spot for recreation in the 19th century. What was early football like, and how did it almost meet its demise? Join me as we discover the beginnings of football at Lincoln High School. Lincoln High formed its first football team in 1892. Initially, they struggled to fill an 11-man roster, and they were coached by several university students. By the end of the 1890s, however, the Lynx were competing with teams from Beatrice, Tacoma, York, Sioux City, Des Moines, and others, and had developed a strong rivalry with Omaha. They even played against the university on occasion. Lincoln faced Omaha twice in 1892, losing their first game and tying the second 10-10, despite having proposed to mop the earth with the boys from Omaha. Lincoln High's student newspaper, The Advocate, documented a game with Omaha in November 1896 at the M Street Park. After winning the coin toss, Lincoln ran 5 yards for a first down. Through a combination of punts and runs, they made it to Omaha's 15-yard line but lost on downs. Omaha also failed to score on their opening drive. It was a defense-heavy game filled with short runs, punts, and fumbles. Late in the second half, the Lynx scored touchdowns on 2 consecutive possessions, winning the game 12-0. Lincoln High School football gained momentum, becoming regional powerhouses and winning state championships in 1899, 1900, and 1901. As you can probably tell, the rules of football were quite different back then. There was no forward passing. Players punted frequently, not just on fourth downs, and only 5 yards were required for a down. One writer in the Nebraska Journal said that football was a stupidly slow pushing match, with scrums of players smashing into each other repeatedly and few penalties applied for punching and eye gouging. Mass momentum plays were used instead of our common pass and run plays. For a more detailed analysis of this history, see the YouTube channel Corn Nation linked in this video's description. Football had been controversial ever since it evolved from British rugby in the 1880s. The rough style of play resulted in numerous on-field deaths each year in the United States. One example is recorded in an 1893 newspaper which explains Raymond Carew, halfback of the Toledo High School football team, was caught in a jam at a game in Adrian, Michigan. A score of players piled on top of him and his neck was dislocated. He died Sunday afternoon. Players in Lincoln suffered frequent and serious injuries playing football. One Kansas City player named Homer Gibson was knocked out cold in a game against Lincoln High in December 1905. Wrote one student in The Advocate, "For many days he was only semi-conscious, noticing very little about him. He was able to talk some now, although he is very weak. The students at the high school unite in wishing for his complete recovery." A debate raged among public figures whether the new sport should be allowed at all. People worried that football was not only physically dangerous, but morally degrading. In 1903, the dean of the University of North Dakota wrote, "If reformed and stripped of its brutalizing tendencies, football alone could do more than it now does for morals. The good moral effects of football are to be doubted." One particularly odious example of football brutality paired with racism comes from a 1903 account of a game played between Lincoln High and York. The York newspaper reported, "In the York team is a colored boy. He is a student in the high school and a good one. He is polite and modest, but he is a good football player. Just as our high school team went into the last game with Lincoln, one of the best players in that team was heard to say, "I will kill that," before the game is out. And he nearly did it. There is no doubt he tried his best to accomplish it. The colored boy escaped with his life, and that was about all. A nationwide charge to ban football was led by Harvard President Charles Eliot, who considered it a dangerous and senseless distraction from academic pursuits. The Nebraska legislature tried unsuccessfully to ban the sport in 1897 and 1898. Eliot's camp was opposed by President Teddy Roosevelt, an ardent supporter of football, and University of Nebraska chancellors Charles E. Bessie and E. Benjamin Andrews. At a local teaching convention, Myrtle Russell delivered a speech entitled, "Is Football Educative or Brutalizing?" While acknowledging the dangers inherent in the game, she also noted that football was one of the best games to test a young man's training, thought, and energy. She added that few injuries would result if players were properly trained. In 1898, Athletic Association managers from Omaha, Lincoln, Nebraska City, West Point, Council Bluffs, and Red Oak, Iowa, organized the area's first interscholastic football league to regulate and standardize local matchups. Some began using the term scientific football to describe a style of play they believed would reduce injuries and make it more enjoyable to watch. In 1900, Lincolnite Frances Taylor predicted that football players in the future would not suffer so much as a sprained ankle. She wrote, "To play on a football 11, one must have attained a high degree of self-control, so that in the midst of the greatest excitement and the rush of the game, he never violates the rigid rules to prevent injury, and he must have had a long and severe scientific training to know how thus to exercise the greatest force and to accomplish wonderful feats without in the slightest degree hurting his opponents." Despite the anti-football movement, the game only grew in popularity in Lincoln. A student writer in 1905 explained that the prospects for a football team were never more promising in the high school. There have been more boys out on the campus than ever before during the first week of school. The eagerness of the boys, even the smaller ones, to make a place on the team is surprising. Nationwide reforms in 1906 aimed to make football safer and more dynamic. Downs were now 10 yards instead of 5. The forward pass was created, and penalties were added for unnecessary roughness. Lincoln High School principal Dr. Frederick Sanders worked with LPS Superintendent W.L. Stevens and the school board to adopt new rules that closely mirrored reforms already taking hold elsewhere. He also imposed new academic standards for players, requiring them to take full course loads and maintain high marks in all classes. The Lynx were so unhappy with these new rules that they disbanded the team in protest. Student athletes may not have realized how close they came to losing football privileges entirely. In February of that year, the school board had been ready to abolish the sport until Stevens talked them out of it. Mr. Stevens defended the game with statistics from high school principals, showing that the great majority of principals in 25 high schools favored the game played under proper regulations and did not believe it harmful nor conducive to disobedience. He made an earnest talk and pointed out that the board might act arbitrarily on this matter and go home to hear no more of it, while he and Dr. Sanders would be compelled to bear the burden such action would bring to them. Stevens saved football at Lincoln High, although he and Sanders did indeed bear the burden of some students' anger. One reporter explained in October, "The players, and in fact the whole school, constitute a sore bunch of humanity. All realize that the real end sought by the school board last winter, the abolishment of football entirely, has been accomplished. There is a general sentiment among the team against Superintendent Stevens and Principal Sanders, who it is claimed appear to be in sympathy with the students and yet stand by the school board." As a result of simmering tensions at the high school, a student demonstration took place on October 18th. Led by a disgruntled former student, a group of students marched into the building and rallied in an attempt to intimidate the principal. The timing of their demonstration could not have been worse, as a group of principals and superintendents from out of town were visiting Lincoln High that day. At an all-school assembly the next day resulted in denunciations and resolutions that were adopted by 600 students. They declared, We, the student body, in mass meeting assembled, do hereby resolve that such acts, demonstrations, and disturbances are the work of a set of rowdies and irresponsible persons and are not countenanced by the school. For the first time ever, a police officer started patrolling school grounds. He was needed on October 19th when a group of rowdies pelted Dr. Sanders with potatoes as he left school for the day and attempted to dunk him in a fountain. One boy named Dick Russell was expelled after he vandalized Sanders' home and physically shoved Sanders when he was confronted. Dr. Sanders held firm, however, and stayed on his principal for another 4 years. The team was reconstituted in 1906, agreeing to follow all new regulations. In their first game of the 1907 season, Lincoln High faced off against Beatrice, losing by a single point. However, by 1908, the Lynx had returned to their former glory. They beat all opponents except Omaha and scored 150 points on the season, only allowing a total of 45 combined points from all teams. The high school grew and the campus expanded to include 3 buildings, but even these were outgrown, so a new large building was constructed in 1915 at 22nd and J. In 1923, high school students self-funded a new stadium with a track called the Oval, where they hosted home football games and practiced many other field sports. Home games were preceded by pep rallies with music, marching, and chants. Fans held large bonfires both on and off campus. Male cheerleaders cheered on the team from the sidelines. Games in Lincoln continued at the Oval and at Northeast High School once that school was opened in 1941. In 1962, Seacrest Field opened near 70th and A, and it has hosted countless high school games ever since. In Lincoln, high school football continues to draw crowds every Friday night in the fall, and it all started 135 years ago with rough rugby-style scrimmages in the parks and fields of the city.